weak cry stumbled through the fading light, luring a lone wanderer to a cruel game. Boys, rocks, and a dog too frail to flinch. A sudden roar scattered them, leaving a whisper in the wreckage. "We're tougher than this." Jamie's bare feet slapped against the cracked dirt as he trudged along, his torn backpack bouncing lightly on his shoulders. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows, when he heard it, a faint whimper, weak and broken, coming from the abandoned lot up ahead. He stopped, tilting his head to listen. There it was again, barely louder than the rustle of dry grass. Curiosity tugged at him, and he slipped through a gap in the rusted wire fence, ignoring the way it snagged at his faded shirt. Inside, he froze. A group of older boys, 5 of them, maybe 16 or 17, stood in a loose circle, laughing as they hurled rocks and swung sticks. In the middle, crumpled in the dust, was a dog, a German shepherd, or at least what was left of one. Its ribs jutted out like a skeleton's, its black and tan fur patchy and matted with blood. Flies buzzed around oozing sores, and its clouded eyes barely flickered as another stone hit its flank. The dog let out a pitiful whine, too weak to even lift its head. "Hey, knock it off!" Jamie shouted, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and anger. The boys turned, sneering at the scrawny 12-year-old glaring at them. One of them, a lanky kid with a chipped tooth, stepped forward and shoved Jamie hard. "Mind your own business, freak," he spat, before tossing one last rock at the dog and motioning for the others to leave. They sauntered off, their laughter fading into the distance. Jamie waited until they were gone, then dropped to his knees beside the dog. Up close, it was worse. The stench of infection hit him first, then the sight of its mangled body. Legs splayed unnaturally, fur singed in places like it'd been burned before. He reached out a trembling hand, brushing its bony shoulder. The dog flinched, but didn't pull away. "Hey, buddy," Jamie whispered, his throat tight. "You're okay now? They're gone." He didn't have much, just a half-empty water bottle and a stale granola bar in his bag, but he pulled out the bottle anyway. Unscrewing the cap, he tipped it carefully, letting a thin stream trickle into the dog's cracked mouth. It lapped at the water feebly, tongue barely moving. Jamie's eyes stung as he watched. "You're a fighter, huh?" he murmured. "Me too." His mind drifted back to the days he didn't like remembering. He'd had a family once. Mum and Dad laughing over pancakes, a little house with a creaky porch swing. Then the fights started, loud and ugly, until they split for good. Neither wanted him. "Too much trouble," Dad had said, hauling a suitcase out the door. Mum just cried and turned away. Jamie ended up with Grandma, but cancer took her too, 2 years back, leaving him alone with nothing but this beat-up backpack and a pair of sneakers he'd outgrown. The dog whimpered again, snapping him out of it. Jamie blinked hard, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I'm calling you Bolt," he said, voice firm like it was a promise. "Like lightning, 'cause you're gonna get strong again, you'll see." He didn't know if he believed it, but he needed to say it. Bolt's cloudy eyes met his, and for a second Jamie swore he saw something flicker there. Trust, maybe, or just desperation. He sat back on his heels, glancing around the empty lot. No food, no shelter, no one to help. Just him and this broken dog. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. "Guess it's you and me now," he said softly, scooting closer to Bolt. The air cooled as night crept in, and Jamie curled up beside him, resting a hand on Bolt's side. He could feel the shallow rise and fall of the dog's breathing, fragile but stubborn. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered, staring up at the darkening sky. Not ever. In that moment, 2 lost souls found each other. One a boy with no home, the other a dog with no hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jamie woke to the sound of Bolt's raspy breathing, faint but steady, cutting through the morning chill. He'd dragged the dog under the sagging overhang of an old barn the night before, a rickety shelter with gaps in the wood that let the wind whistle through. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and looked at Bolt. The German shepherd hadn't moved much, still sprawled in the dirt, but his ears twitched when Jamie shifted closer. "Morning, buddy," Jamie said. He rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a crusty heel of bread he'd scavenged from a diner's trash 2 days ago. He broke it in half, the crumbs scattering, and held a piece out. Bolt's nose quivered, but he didn't lift his head. "Come on, you gotta eat something," Jamie urged, nudging the bread closer. After a long pause, Bolt's tongue flicked out, snagging the morsel. It was slow, weak, but it was progress. Jamie grinned, popping the other half into his own mouth and chewing through the stale grit. He knew Bolt needed more than scraps, though. Those sores, red, oozing, crawling with flies, weren't going to heal on their own. Jamie remembered a guy he'd met a few weeks back, a scruffy vendor named Pete who sold cheap trinkets from a cart in town. Pete had bragged once about working with a vet years ago, stitching up dogs after fights. Jamie figured he was his best shot. Scooping Bolt's frail body into his arms, he staggered toward the road, the dog's weight heavier than he'd expected. Pete was parked near the gas station, his cart piled with chipped mugs and faded keychains. He squinted as Jamie approached, cradling Bolt like a baby. "What's this mess?" Pete grumbled, scratching his graying beard. Jamie set Bolt down gently and pointed at the sores. "He's hurt bad, can you help?" Pete sighed, but something in Jamie's wide, pleading eyes must have softened him. "All right, kid, watch close. I ain't doing this twice." Pete showed him how to clean the wounds with water from a dented canteen, dabbing away the grime with a rag that smelled like motor oil. "Small sips of water, tiny bits of food," Pete said, his voice gruff but patient. "Too much at once and he'll choke." Jamie nodded, soaking it all in. By the time Pete waved him off, Bolt's sores looked less angry, and Jamie felt a flicker of hope. Back at the barn, he spent the day whispering to Bolt. Stories about sneaking onto a freight train once, or the time he'd slept under a bridge during a thunderstorm. "Thought I'd get washed away," he chuckled, brushing a hand over Bolt's matted fur. The dog didn't move much, but late that afternoon his tail gave a feeble twitch. Jamie's heart leapt. "You hear me, don't you?" he said, leaning close. Bolt's eyes, still cloudy, seemed to sharpen just a bit. Days blurred into nights, and Jamie's stomach gnawed at him. The bread was gone, and scavenging was harder with Bolt to look after. He trudged into town one evening, leaving Bolt curled under a blanket of old sacks. At a corner store, he lingered by the dumpster, fishing out a bruised apple and a soggy sandwich crust. The clerk spotted him, some beefy guy with a buzz cut, and stormed out, yelling, "Get lost, you little rat!" Jamie bolted, clutching his haul, the apple bouncing in his pocket. He made it back to Bolt, panting, and split the sandwich crust between them. "Better than nothing, right?" he said, forcing a smile. Then came the morning that changed everything. Jamie was splashing water on his face from a puddle when he heard a shuffle behind him. He turned, and there was Bolt. Shaky, wobbly, but standing. The dog took one step, then two, his legs trembling like they might give out. Jamie dropped to his knees, tears spilling over before he could stop them. "You did it!" he cried, throwing his arms around Bolt's neck. "You're my buddy, you know that? My best buddy." That night, under a sky streaked with moonlight, they lay side by side on the barn floor. Bolt's head rested near Jamie's hand, warm and solid. For the first time in years, Jamie didn't feel alone. Bolt wasn't just a dog anymore. He was family, the kind that stayed. Months had passed since Bolt first stood on those shaky legs, and now the German Shepherd trotted beside Jamie with a steady gait. His fur had grown back, thick and glossy in patches, though scars still traced his sides like battle lines. Jamie had traded the barn for odd jobs around a small cluster of houses a few miles down the road. Sweeping porches, hauling firewood, anything folks would pay a dime or a sandwich for. It wasn't a home, but it kept them fed, and Bolt's sharp ears and growing strength made Jamie feel safer than he had in years. It was late afternoon, the air thick with the smell of dust and pine, when they wandered near a weathered wooden house on the edge of the settlement. Jamie was kicking a pebble along, Bolt sniffing at a tuft of weeds, when a scream pierced the quiet. He snapped his head up. Smoke was curling out from the house's cracked windows, dark and heavy, followed by the crackle of flames licking up the walls. A woman stumbled onto the porch, clutching two kids, a girl about 6 and a toddler, her face streaked with soot. "Help!" she shrieked, voice raw. "My husband's still inside." Jamie's stomach dropped. He could see the fire spreading, orange tongues darting through the kitchen window, the woman's eyes locked on his, wild with panic. "Please, he's by the stairs, he passed out." Before he could think, Jamie was running toward the house, Bolt barking at his heels. "Stay back!" he yelled at the dog, but Bolt ignored him, ears flat and tail stiff. Inside, the heat hit like a wall. Smoke stung Jamie's eyes, thick and choking, blurring everything into a grey haze. He coughed hard, pulling his shirt over his nose as he stumbled toward the stairs. There! A man sprawled on the floor, limp, a rag doll in a flannel shirt. Jamie grabbed his arms, dragging him backward, the guy's boots scraping the wood. He was heavy, way heavier than Bolt, and Jamie's skinny arms burned with the effort. "Come on, mister, wake up," he grunted. But the man didn't stir. Behind him, Bolt's barks cut through the roar of the fire. Jamie glanced back. Through the smoke, he saw the woman and kid still inside, frozen near the door. The little girl had tripped, her knee bloody, and the toddler wailed in his mum's arms. A flaming beam groaned above them, swaying like it was about to fall. "Get out!" Jamie shouted, voice cracking. But they didn't move, paralyzed. Bolt didn't hesitate. He darted past Jamie, a black and tan blur, and planted himself between the kids and the fire. He barked loud, sharp, nudging the girl with his nose until she scrambled to her feet. The woman snapped out of it, clutching her toddler tighter as Bolt herded them toward the door, snapping at their heels like a sheepdog. Jamie kept pulling the man, his lungs screaming for air, when a deafening crack split the room. The beam crashed down, flames exploding around it. "Bolt!" Jamie yelled, heart lurching. Through the smoke, he saw the dog leap, shoving the little girl clear as the beam slammed into the floor. She stumbled out the door, safe, but Bolt yelped, a sharp, pained sound. The fire caught his fur, singeing it black, and a chunk of wood clipped his hind leg. He crumpled, whining, but dragged himself toward the exit, eyes locked on Jamie. Jamie hauled the man outside, collapsing in the dirt as the woman rushed over, sobbing. "Tom! Oh, God, Tom!" she cried, shaking her husband. He coughed, groggy, sucking in air. Alive. The kids clung to her, faces smudged with ash, staring wide-eyed at the house now fully ablaze. Sirens wailed in the distance, red lights flashing as fire trucks roared up the road. But Jamie didn't care about that. He crawled to Bolt, who lay panting a few feet away, leg twisted at a bad angle. Burnt fur stuck to his side, and blood trickled from a gash where the beam had hit. "No, no, no!" Jamie choked out, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. He dropped beside the dog, cradling his head. "You can't leave me, Bolt. You hear me? You're my hero. Don't go." Bolt's eyes, bright despite the pain, met his, and a weak lick brushed Jamie's hand. The firefighters swarmed in, hoses blasting, shouting orders. One of them, a big guy with a buzz cut, knelt beside Jamie. "Kid, we got him from here," he said, lifting Bolt gently. Another carried the toddler, who'd started coughing again, to an ambulance. The woman ran over, still crying, and threw her arms around Jamie. "You saved us," she sobbed. "You and that dog. You saved my family." Her gratitude washed over him, but all he could see was Bolt, limp in the firefighter's arms. As the chaos settled, police lights flickered across the scene, officers scribbling notes. The house was a smoldering ruin, but the family was safe. Huddled together, alive because of him and Bolt. Jamie sank to the ground, staring at his dog being loaded onto a stretcher. Bolt's chest rose and fell, shallow but there, and his gaze found Jamie's again. It wasn't just trust in those eyes anymore. It was pride, fierce and unshakable. Jamie wiped his face, smearing ash and tears. Bolt wasn't just his buddy, he was a hero, the kind people wrote stories about. And as the medics worked around them, Jamie knew one thing for sure. They'd faced the fire together, and they'd come out stronger. News of the fire spread like wildfire. By the next morning, a local reporter had snapped a photo of Jamie covered in soot and clutching Bolt in front of the charred ruins of the Carter house. The headline read, "Homeless boy and his dog save family from fire," and the story had taken over town. People whispered about it in the diner, shared it over coffee, and soon strangers were craning their necks to spot the scruffy kid and his scarred German shepherd. The Carters, the family Jamie and Bolt had pulled away from the fire, had talked about them endlessly. Mrs. Carter, whose name was Ellen, tracked Jamie down a few days later. The boy was sitting on the sidewalk, distraught, unsure how to treat Bolt's injuries, when she pulled up in a beat-up scooter. "You're Jamie, aren't you?" she asked, stepping out, her eyes still red from crying. The boy nodded, wary. "I owe you everything," she said, her voice shaking. "My kids, my husband. We'd be gone without you." Jamie shrugged, scratching Bolt's ear. "I just did what I had to do." But Ellen wouldn't have it. She and her husband Tom had talked about it. They'd lost their home, sure, but they'd also gained something. A debt they couldn't repay with words. "We want you to come live with us," she said. "You and Bolt. Forever." Jamie, looking at her and Bolt's situation, had agreed to a better life for both of them, away from day-to-day living. It took a week to get things sorted out. The Carters were renting a small house now, a 2-bedroom with a sagging porch, and on a cold winter morning, Jamie stood under an oak tree out front. Ellen handed him a piece of paper with his name, Jamie Carter, signed and official. Under the fervent care, Bolt recovered quickly and got a new collar, a blue one with the word Hero stamped in silver. Tom clapped Jamie on the shoulder. "You've given us back our faith in good things," he said gruffly. "This is your home now." Jamie slept in a real bed that first night, the sheets clean and warm. Dinner was meatballs and mashed potatoes, steam rising from the plate, and he laughed as the Carter kids, Lily and Ben, shot peas at each other. Bolt lay at his feet, tail thrashing, as watchful as ever. It felt strange, this warmth, this togetherness, but it fit. Later, by the fire, Jamie looked at Bolt and whispered, "We'll do more, you know. Help dogs like you." The promise settled in his chest, firm and bright, as the Carters laughed around him. A family, his family, built from the ashes. Years rolled by like soft waves on the lake near the Carter house, where Jamie, now 16, often sat with Bolt. The German shepherd's muzzle had turned silver, his steps slow and deliberate, but his eyes still held that quiet fire. They'd spend hours there, Jamie tossing pebbles into the water, Bolt resting his head on the boy's knee. The Carters had given Jamie a life, school, a bike, a room with posters of baseball stars. But Bolt was his anchor, the one who'd seen him through the dark days. One fall afternoon, golden leaves drifting down, Jamie leaned back against a tree. "Been thinking, buddy," he said, voice low. "I want to open a place for dogs like you, ones nobody wants. Give 'em a shot, you know?" Bolt tilted his head, a faint wag rippling his tail, like he understood. Jamie smiled. "Gonna call it Bolt's Lily. Sounds right, doesn't it?" The dog huffed, a soft sound, and Jamie scratched behind his ears, dreaming of kennels and wagging tails. Winter came gentle that year, and one early morning, with the sun just peeking over the horizon, Jamie found Bolt by the lake again. The old dog lay still, his breathing shallow, head nestled on Jamie's leg. Jamie's chest tightened, but he didn't cry. Not yet. He stroked Bolt's fur, whispering, "Thanks for sticking with me, pal. You're the best thing I ever had." Bolt's eyes flickered, warm and calm, then closed as the light spread across the water. He was gone, peaceful, like he'd waited for that moment. Jamie buried him under the oak by the lake, carving Bolt, my hero, into the bark. Years later, he made good on his promise. Bolt's Lily opened its gates, rows of pens filled with strays, each one a chance at a new start. People came, inspired by the story of a boy and his dog, and Jamie, now a man, told it often, how saving Bolt had saved him too. The lake stretched still and bright, reflecting a legacy of kindness that outlasted time.